Let's talk about workplace comedies. Workplace comedies primarily occur within an office or business setting. They sometimes tend to satirize, but are more likely to roast the relatable experience of work. The most notable example, of course, is The Office, portraying a typical office environment with dry humor and occasional outlandish situations. But workplace comedies take different forms and even have different types of humor, such as the overly absurd situations of the IT crowd. Most of these shows share a commonality that workplaces can be a mundane and/or stressful experience, with coworkers and superiors who are often confrontational, ridiculous, or just plain idiots. Workplace comedy also depends on how the culture is shaped around work. Japan, in particular, has a notable status obsession with work. In Japanese culture, young men are often expected to become what's known as a salaryman. As a term that has been around since the 1930s, the Japanese salaryman is typically described as a white-collar worker who displays a ridiculous amount of loyalty to his company or governmental organization. This loyalty goes far beyond just staying with your current employer for most, if not all, of your career. A salaryman is expected to work longer hours and often overtime. They're also expected to engage in after-work activities with their coworkers and bosses. A salaryman's entire life revolves around work, day and night, to the point of practically shunning his entire personal life. Another word associated with the salaryman is karoshi, which essentially means working yourself to death. These types of deaths can range from heart attacks to strokes to starvation. There's also the term karojisatsu, which is suicide due to mental anguish from work. Though these two terms are not exclusive to Japan, it is certainly far more prevalent in a culture that centers work around a cultural status. A salaryman is often referred to as having higher status, and those who can't live up to this may feel like they have no worth. Now, there has been some development from various governmental and health organizations to curb the illnesses incurred from such a salaryman lifestyle. However, the larger issue of the social stigma and status surrounding the salaryman still lingers in Japan. Japan's media reflects this because the salaryman has a work lifestyle that is not only favored but encouraged. This lifestyle has an entire subgenre of media, even directly using the term salaryman in their titles. There are salaryman comedies, but they differ from workplace comedies, because there is a different goal in mind. This type of media rarely questions the lifestyle itself or even mocks the absurdity of overworking yourself. Instead, salaryman media often places the onus of your worth more on your work and less on your superior's leadership. The salaryman protagonists often treat this lifestyle more like a goal, as though they were going to win a sporting event when in reality they're just doing paperwork. In the manga series Salaryman Kentaro, the titular character promises his wife on her deathbed that he'll reform his troublesome ways and become a salaryman. In the anime series Africa Salaryman, the salaryman lifestyle is turned into a slapstick comedy of anthropomorphic animals struggling to maintain their jobs. And that brings us to Aggretsuko, the last decade's most popular workplace comedy anime. And this is indeed a salaryman-style show, but it may not look like it at first glance. The central theme of how much the main character despises work contradicts this mindset. However, as the show continues, it becomes abundantly clear that the main character of Aggretsuko is not raging against the machine with her heavy metal anger. It's really just another salaryman show doing what all salaryman media does, but perhaps more deceptively. The show follows the 25-year-old red panda Retsuko, working a stressful accounting job in Tokyo. Retsuko's appeal within the series is that she is frustrated with her office job and, when angered, resorts to solo heavy metal karaoke to get these feelings out of her system. Now yes, on the surface, this might not seem like a salaryman show, given that Retsuko does not like her work and does not spend all of her personal time doing office-related events. But Retsuko's heavy metal rants in private are not a form of rebellion against the cult of work. It's really just blowing off steam. Retsuko dislikes the stresses of her workplace, but never really uses that anger to do something to improve it. Furthermore, the show frames these karaoke scenes as not just a relatable aspect, but a remedy. Are you pissed off that your boss has overworked you? Or that you need to work overtime that you didn't ask for? Well, just scream into a microphone and then return to work. And I can understand why audiences would love this framing of the character in this regard. because leading a fight against the cult of work is hard, but picking up a microphone and singing with rage is easy. From the perspective of relieving stress, Retsuko is a highly relatable character, because this is all that some people feel that they can do with their problems at work. And if that's all the show was, it would be fine. The problem is that the show constantly tries to keep Retsuko at her office job, despite the numerous opportunities that she is given to escape. We'll return to this aspect in a moment, but for the moment, let's divulge Retsuko's workplace. Retsuko's social circle at work is filled with exaggerated yet familiar characters. The director of her department is Tan, a pig who seems determined to overload Retsuko with work in hopes of crushing her spirit. He identifies her as Calendar Girl, to signal that her days at the company are numbered. Later, when Retsuko's personal life starts chipping away her morale at work, Tan will sometimes rejuvenate her with monologues, as when he explains earnestly that his wife and kids give his life purpose. He tries to show a side of himself that is not all that cruel, that he's really not trying to be a mean boss, and that he has the same hopes and desires as Retsuko. And I understand what they're going for here, but this framing is kinda gross. The show tries to stress that your boss doesn't really hate you, despite overloading you with paperwork, forcing you to work longer hours, and threatening to fire you daily despite your dedication. The way that it's set up in the show, it suggests that your boss is a thoughtful person with his own philosophy on life, and that all his vitriol at work is really because he wants what's best for you. Portraying Tan in this way places the blame for Retsuko's mental and workplace problems less on the boss overworking her and more on herself for not proving to be a workaholic. And this anime can just f*** right off with that nonsense. People who are overstressed with their jobs and harassed by their bosses don't need to be told that their bosses are just giving them tough love. They need to be told the truth. Outside of Tan, Retsuko also has some coworkers that become workplace friends. Feneko, a fox, is a coworker of Retsuko and a social media guru obsessed with dissecting gossip and online posts. She seems calm and cool with a low voice, but we later learn that this social media obsession has claimed her life. Haida, a spotted hyena, has a crush on Retsuko, but it's an unrequited romance that causes him to slip into depressive states of constant rejection. Sonata, a gazelle, is Retsuko's cutesy workplace suck-up, with a thriving social media presence. She's also manipulative and deceptive in her constant need to control the lives of others. Kabe is a hippo wife and mother, who is overly excited about her work and has nothing else all that interesting going on in her life. Any mildly juicy gossip at work will excite her immediately. Kamiya is Tan's subordinate and is basically a class traitor, but will never be proven that wrong in his quasi-sexual sucking up to the boss. Retsuko will also make two intimate friends with the higher-ranking employees of Director Gori, a gorilla, and Miss Washimi, a secretary bird. To Retsuko, they always seem to have the appearance of being prim and proper, the way that they would strut down the hallway. But we later learn that they have troubled pasts and even bitter disagreements. They are far from perfect. So, throughout the show, Retsuko is essentially having a quarter-life crisis. She is 25, single, and feels like her life is going nowhere. She has two goals for the future. One is to leave the struggle of her work behind, and the other is to get married and have children. She wants to leave her job, but is also stressed about pursuing another line of work. She wants to find a man to marry, but hasn't found the right guy yet, and isn't sure what she is looking for. In Season 1, Retsuko falls in love with the coworker Risasuke. They seem to hit it off pretty well. However, once Retsuko reveals her karaoke passion, they break up. But their split wasn't just a matter of Risasuke not sharing the same feelings or interests as Retsuko. Risasuke is revealed to be what is referred to in Japan as a herbivore man. This term doesn't refer to his eating habits, but rather his ambition. Herbivore men are described as not being committed to pursuing a romantic relationship with women, and are pretty much indifferent about sex. As you might expect, the term has become noted more as a pejorative for not embracing traditional masculine traits. So, where did this term come from? Well, it was first used by Maki Fukasawa, who used it to refer to a new form of masculinity in Japan that was not bound by old-fashioned ideals more closely associated with the salaryman. Philosopher Masahiro Morioka has better described the term as, quote, kind and gentle men who, without being bound by manliness, do not pursue romantic relationships voraciously, and have no aptitude for being hurt or hurting others. Fukasawa did not, however, intend for such a term to be associated with Japan's sinking birth rate and troubled work ethic. So rather than such lifestyles being viewed as a shifting motivation of Japan's work culture, or the societal view of men, or family goals, Japan's media and pop culture ran with the term as a negative connotation. It was more or less a label for the anti-salaryman. This term doesn't just refer to someone who doesn't have a full-time job, as that lifestyle has more or less been given the title of freeder. Instead, herbivore men are branded as such for having little interest in sex and not being enthused about pursuing marriage. And since marriage is often interconnected with work success in Japan, herbivore men are often used as the catch-all term to describe those who are ruining fertility rates and the economy. So Risasuke is posed not just as someone bad for Retsuko, but bad for the salaryman lifestyle, and really all of Japan. With Retsuko's romance dead by the end of the season, she returns to work and the status quo is maintained. And get used to this type of ending, because you're going to see a lot of it. Season 2 has the most interesting dynamic between deciding on a career and family. While trying to get her driver's license, Retsuko meets Tadano, a donkey. He at first seems to be a slacker, but it is later revealed, as they get to know each other better, that Tadano is a rich tech mogul. Tadano has a philosophy about how he believes the world should be improved, and it essentially boils down to changing the economic structure of society. Tadano brings up how technological automation will reduce the need for labor. Retsuko attempts to counter this by stating that the lack of jobs would be alarming for people who need money. And to solve this problem, Tadano blatantly says that late-stage capitalism hinders the future, and that it will have to be dismantled. Now, one might be forgiven if this character's philosophy instills an anti-capitalist message in this anime. After all, it's not that common in a TV series to hear a character literally use the phrase late-stage capitalism and condemn it, and even less so for a workplace comedy. However, Tadano is unfortunately framed as wrong. His lack of considering the individual is what ultimately leads to Retsuko breaking off the relationship. Tadano offers Retsuko a chance to escape her tedious office work forever by staying with him. The deal breaker is that Tadano doesn't want to marry or have children. This places Retsuko in a tough spot by making her choose between two destinies. She can either leave work behind for a relationship that won't fulfill her individual long-term goals, or stick with her work where she may find a relationship with someone who wants marriage and kids. And of course, Retsuko ultimately returns to work and breaks up with Tadano, because that's the status quo that the show needs to maintain. The ending is a little bit deceptive though. Retsuko doesn't just reluctantly return to work as is present in the first season. She instead embraces her work. She is led to a point where she believes that the only way to find true happiness for marriage and children is through this office lifestyle. But the worst part of this arc is how it frames the desire to counter the capitalist structure as an erosion of personal freedoms. Now, I'm willing to admit that this might not have been what the creatives were aiming for with this story, but it's hard not to see this with the massive whiplash of Season 2 ending on reinforcing the status quo. And if Season 2 didn't seem as transparent in favoring work culture, then Season 3 leaves little doubt. The premise of the third season is that Retsuko is low on funds again, and has ended up in a car accident. Since she can't pay for the damages to the other car, she instead decides to work off her debt for the person that she hit. In this case, she's working for a pop idol manager. So Retsuko is now working two jobs, which is portrayed more as aspirational than detrimental to her already chaotic work life, personal life, and mental state. In other words, this is the hustle culture propaganda arc. Retsuko's moonlighting as a pop idol manager proves to have a future in it, because as you might expect, she works her way up to becoming a pop idol herself. using her metal voice of anger to entertain crowds. On the surface, this might seem like a solid step forward for Aggretsuko to find work that feels less like drudgery. Unfortunately, this show has merch to sell and needs to keep Aggretsuko relatable for her office job. The dangers of being a pop idol are presented when Aggretsuko is stalked and attacked by a crazy fan. So by the end of the season, Aggretsuko decides to go back to work. And she not only drops her interest in entrepreneurship, but continues to halt her relationship with Haida. Yeah, it should be noted, throughout these seasons, Haida keeps constantly trying to pursue Aggretsuko, and he never succeeds. That's like another status quo the show has to maintain. Now, to those not paying attention to what this series is saying about work, the season 3 ending might seem surprisingly awful for returning to the status quo after everything else that happened in this season. But the thing is, that has been the show's goal this entire time. Maintaining the status quo and embracing work culture. Every season begins with Aggretsuko hating her work, and it ends with her realizing that she cannot leave work, but in a more hopeful tone. It's a vicious cycle that Aggretsuko doesn't seem to question much by the end of each season. In her world, work is comforting. Work is her family. Work is opportunities that do not exist outside of her cubicle walls. This brings us to Season 4, which focuses the least on Aggretsuko. The majority of this season focuses on the changing of the guard and management at Aggretsuko's company. This leads to Haida and Tan taking up most of the season as their roles within the company are called into question. The business is now placed under the control of Himuro, a far more hands-on company president. He's portrayed as being a bolder leader for trying to improve efficiency and productivity. He frames his campaign as being a harsh form of progress that is essential to staying afloat. He also brings up that this will mean shedding the old ways. But the truth is that his motivation is rather traditional. In fact, there's a lot of workplace value shoved into this season that becomes almost too grotesque to watch. The tragedy of the season is not so much the layoffs, but the denial of being able to work. Kabe, for example, is given a choice of either being more devoted to her work or becoming a stay-at-home mother, presented less like a personal choice for her desired lifestyle and more like an injunction. Tan is downgraded from a management position to a dull one of constant downtime. He could use this time to do something more fruitful, but he spends all his time just pining for his management position. Being a homemaker or accepting a position with less responsibility, in this show at least, is treated as a punishment. Haida, however, works harder and is rewarded for his efforts. And while part of that reward is more money, it also means more work. Haida works late into the night while working on a company project. He is approached by Himuro, who only passively says that Haida should burn himself out. He does not, however, stress this point as one of concern. Haida will also admit, almost playfully, that he actually kinda enjoys the extended work that he's been given. This conversation is punctuated by Himuro taking Haida on a trip to the gym, where their workplace conversation continues. This is all par for the core salaryman stuff. The climax of the season involves the overworked and stressed staff banding together to save their jobs. And while this camaraderie saves the day, there's another option present for solving this situation that never comes up. They could, unionize. Some might remark that Japanese unionization doesn't apply, but this excuse is mostly out of ignorance. Some people will probably ask, does Japan even have unions? And the answer is yes, but much like unions in the US, their presence and power have diminished over time. In fact, the presence of unions in all media has kind of diminished over time. The Simpsons, for example, had a great episode on unionization, but that was in the 90s, and the show hasn't really addressed the topic much since. F is for Family is probably the most recent show I can think of that actually addresses unions, but that show is meant to take place in the 1970s, framing unionization more as a product of the past. Even more relevant media like the latest Aqua Teen Hunger Force movie usually just bring up unionization in a manner more playful than insightful with satire. It should be noted that for as much as Aggretsuko comes off like cult of work propaganda, it's more than just anime that's doing this. American work culture has plenty of propaganda for work. This reached a fever pitch with articles from Business Insider that generated the new phrase, quiet quitting. Quiet quitting was framed as employees being lazy and apathetic at work for never putting forth any ingenuity or initiative. But the more appropriate way to describe it would be that employees are only doing what is asked of them and not going out of their way to do work that they will not be compensated for. The many millennials already working overtime just to pay the bills and survive are not buying into this nonsense. Propagandists tried this again by inventing the phrase loud quitting, which is really just demanding what you're owed for your work or threatening to leave if you don't get it. And the people writing these garbage pieces can just f*** right off. So anyway, how does Season 4 of Aggretsuko resolve this management issue and save everybody's jobs? Well, it kinda doesn't. Like, it gets resolved and the status quo is maintained, but like in a weird way. So Himura leaves the company after Haida stands up for himself via an arm wrestling match. And no, I'm not kidding, like he arm wrestles him for like his position. So Retsuko decides to back him up by... Okay, how do I best describe this? So she backs him up by making a laser beam with her death growl. And I honestly don't know a better way to describe it than that. So after all that weirdness, everything just goes back to normal. Well, I mean, except for Haida, who ended up quitting because he was disillusioned with the dirty work that he was expected to do in the office with cooking the books. But don't get too hopeful about Haida having some revelation about the cult of work in the next season. I mean, at this point, you should probably know better, but I feel like I should just prep you anyway. So Season 5, the final season of Aggretsuko, is one of the most aggravating for being more explicitly involved in politics. Now, for the first few episodes, the show focuses on Haida being unemployed and homeless, with his upper-class family shunning him and Retsuko judging him. Haida tries to make ends meet with a daytime labor job and seeks housing at a net cafe. Net cafes operate 24 hours a day as a place to use cubicles containing a computer with internet access. In both the show and reality, net cafes have become a place for homeless people to stay at night for a smaller price than an apartment or a hotel. This is why net cafes have often expanded to include access to food and showers. The reliance on net cafes for housing has led to another designation of lower economic class in Japan, referred to as either net cafe refugees or the cyber homeless. During his stay at the net cafe, Haida meets Shikabane, a woman in her 20s who relies on the cafe for housing. Haida learns about the economic issues of being a net cafe refugee. He works freelance jobs during the day and games all night, finding little time for sleep. Haida also meets another day laborer who resides at the cafe. This laborer will later disappear after an injury, never to return to the net cafe, leaving the horrors of this lifestyle uncomfortably up in the air. Eventually, Retsuko confronts Haida, who had been hiding his shame for the longest time and didn't want Retsuko to know that he was living at a net cafe. She takes pity on him and decides to house him at her apartment. Even though Haida has shown some mercy for his efforts, he is still judged harshly for not having a job, despite how hard he has been working. This is amplified when Haida and Retsuko will visit Retsuko's parents. While Haida tries to pretend that he's employed to save himself from shame, the pressure leads to Haida confessing his unemployment. Although the parents seem okay with Haida's unemployment status, they still silently judge him by refusing to photograph him in a group photo. So this is all just reinforcing the fact that Haida needs to become more of a salaryman. The second half of the season focuses on Retsuko being unwittingly thrown into the world of politics. Retsuko is sought out by a failing political party of the Japanese House of Representatives. The political party favors Retsuko's rage-induced singing as a way to reach voters who are tired of old and out-of-touch politicians. Now, you might be thinking that Retsuko's interest in politics would coincide with the problems of net cafe refugees. You might be forgiven for thinking that Retsuko would run for office on the promise of improving conditions for people like Shikabane. But remember that this is Aggretsuko, and it needs to maintain that status of work. Not only does Retsuko take little note of the plight of the cyber homeless, but she actually commandeers the net cafe itself as her campaign headquarters. And watching her campaign remove cubicles that could be used for housing people, all for the sake of running for office, is just... It's not a good look. But hey, I mean, she might be forgiven for this if her whole campaign was to, make sure that net cafe refugees would actually have a place to stay so she could actually make the world a better place for them. Spoiler alert, she doesn't do this. What's even worse is that this headquarters idea is encouraged by Tadano. Yeah, remember Tadano? He was the rich tech mogul from Season 2? You know, the one who seemed wise to the problems of late-stage capitalism? Well, now he's just a rich guy who thinks that net cafes are a cute and fun place to hang out. This is pretty gross, especially considering how much Tadano brags about how his home is too big and not cozy for working. Like, really, imagine a billionaire visiting a homeless shelter and being amazed at its coolness. Wait a minute, come to think of it, why didn't Haida and Retsuko ask Tadano to use his place for the campaign headquarters? And wait a minute, why did they ask him when they were low on funds and had to pay off a loan for their campaign? There are so many issues facing Retsuko and Haida in this season that could easily be resolved by Tadano's wealth. And yet, this never comes up because Tadano never offers and nobody ever asks, despite how prominent Tadano is in this season. It shouldn't be a surprise that Retsuko does not win the election. I expected as much given how lacking Retsuko is in her campaign. She becomes boring when she sticks to facts and voters just end up ignoring her. And when she finally does sing on her campaign trail, she does gain a crowd, but the only rage that she can muster in her performance is for little stuff that has nothing to do with politics. Like, she gets angry at soy sauce packets and streaming video platforms and just common workplace problems. Like, not even like political problems, just like issues where she hates her coworkers. It's no wonder she doesn't win the election, because her singing is not even vaguely about the issues that would inspire voters to choose her regarding governmental policies. So, how does this series frame her loss in the election as a good ending? Well, Haida's brother, who is running for office, becomes inspired by Retsuko's music to propose a radical new bill. This is kind of framed as a win because it's assumed that this bill will do some good for the people of Japan. And that bill is to remove any representative over the age of 65. What? This is a garbage bill for several reasons. First, I mean, it's ageist, believing that all the problems in Japan are due to the elderly politicians being out of touch. Second, it does nothing to address Japan's real issues beyond shifting the political seats. It's more concerned with party placement than the general population's real problems. And third, this bill is so unbelievable that there's no reason to believe that it would even pass. The show even briefly brings this up after the election, that it won't really go far. But hey, I mean, in the end, Haida and his brother finally stood up to their stuffy politician dad. So that's nice for them. As for everybody else, they'll have to endure more stuffy, business-as-usual politics that will do nothing to address the fundamental economic issues in Japan. As if to pour salt in that wound, the finale features Shikabane staring at the high prices of apartments and remarking how costly they are. It doesn't look like she's gonna buy one, just that they're really, really expensive. What a great end to her arc. Perhaps someone thinks that Retsuko's inspiration for the age restriction bill will do some good further down the line. But the people who are suffering right now can't live in the future. They live in the here and now. And the idea that restricting ages of politicians will cure bad governmental policies feels like a very empty promise. The series' final scene features Retsuko crammed in a subway with her rage burning. She will probably sing an angry song about this later and return to her same work environment. Again, like every season. Because that's what Aggretsuko has been about this entire time. Anger about the frustrations of day-to-day life, but doing nothing to change it, despite how many opportunities she is given to do just that. It's kinda sad, because Aggretsuko can actually be a funny and relatable show. There are still episodes of Season 1 and 2 that I genuinely enjoy. But make no mistake, Aggretsuko is not a show about raging against the machine. It is feeding the machine exactly what it wants.